Hey everyone, welcome back to Modern React tutorial series. And in this video, I'm going to talk about one more hook called useEffect hook. So the effect hook let us perform side effect in a functional component. I can give you some of the examples of side effects, and these are the standard examples, and there can be more possibilities of having side effects. So one of the side effect example I can think of is fetching data. Second one would be DOM manipulation, and that is manual DOM manipulation or manual DOM updates that you are performing basically. Because React handles DOM manipulation and DOM update by itself, but if we are doing DOM manipulation or DOM updates by ourselves in the code, then that would be manual DOM updates, I would say. And the third example would be setting up subscriptions. Now setting up subscription would be different example, and we might need different technology to have that subscription and all. But I'm going to show you how to fetch data and how to do DOM manipulation and how to handle those DOM updates using useEffect hook. Now these side effects are also divided into two different categories, or I would say two types of side effects. So one of the side effect requires cleanup. You need to do some of the cleanup in your code just to avoid memory leaks. And one doesn't need any cleanup. And we are going to see both the example. So this video is going to have a lot of information. So I hope, or I request you watch this video till end, and you're definitely going to learn useEffect hook in a much better manner. So I think we can get started. From this video, I'm going to use create React app. So I have set up the React development environment. Now we are getting away from CodePen. So I think CodePen was a good choice for creating small examples. But from this video, we are going to start using create React environment. And if you don't know how to create the project using create React app, I have a video in this series where I have explained all the steps for setting up React development environment, right from the download of and installation of Node.js and all. So you can watch that video and then you can come back to this video. So if you see, I have created the app component with just rendering a simple app div, and I have index.js where I'm rendering that particular app component. So we're going to write all of our code inside this app. So let's start with the first example of useEffect hook. So let's start with DOM manipulation first. So I'm going to create a new component here, the counter component, which is like very standard and simple component. And first of all, I'm going to add some state to counter component where I'm going to have a count and a set count method. Now I'm going to use state. So I can directly call this use state. You see here, it got imported. In case of CodePen, we have to write something like this. But when we are using React development environment, we don't need to write like that. We can directly use state and we can import it like this on the top. So use state, and I'm going to keep it initial value as 0, and I'm going to return, maybe I can return a button with count value. I need to use JSX syntax, those curly brackets, and on click, let's write a handler function where we can increment the count. So something like this, set count plus 1. So let me refactor this code a bit. Take this down so it is more readable. Now I'm going to use this counter component here inside the app. So let me return the counter here. Now if I save my application, you see I got the button with 0 as initial value. So when I click on this, it keeps changing, right? So we are basically on a click of this button, we are incrementing the counter by 1, and this count variable is basically a state in this component. That's why, whenever the state changes, we're using this useState hook, which we use for state changes in our component. So whenever count is going to update, this count or this button is going to have a different label. See that? Now I'm going to use this state value, and I can do something like this. So I can use document.title. So if you know, the document has a title here on the top, right? So I'm going to set that title to something like this. You clicked. And then I'm going to add the count and space. So I just want to check like how many times I'm clicking on this button, and I'm setting that count value as a title here on the top. So now I have written this code directly inside my counter component. Okay, so I'm going to save this. And when I click, see, you clicked 0 times. When I click on this, you clicked 1 time, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I can write this code, this DOM manipulation code or DOM update code directly inside my component. But this is not a good practice. You shouldn't write your DOM updates directly hanging around in this component. Okay, so we're going to move this component into a special hook called useEffect hook, because this is a side effect. I'm changing the DOM. This is a side effect in React. So as per React documentation, you should handle all of these side effects inside something called useEffect hook. So I'm going to import useEffect hook, and I'm going to use that useEffect. And this hook takes function as an argument. So I'm going to pass a function to this hook, and inside that function I'm going to call this update. So here I'm going to update the title. So this is the right place. This function is the right place where you should update your DOM. So whenever you see a scenario where you need to do any DOM update, so if I can give you one example practically where we use this. So let's say, suppose you have a form in your application and you want to focus on one of the text input element when the form loads in the application, right? In that case, you can use useEffect to target that input element and set a focus as the form loads. So that could be one of the example, and there can be multiple examples. So I'm using useEffect hook. It takes function as an argument, and inside that function, I'm handling side effects. Really simple, right? So I'm going to save this, and nothing is going to change actually. I mean, the output will be same. So when you clicked 0 times, I can click and it keeps on changing. So this is a really simple example of useEffect hook for DOM updates. So let's see what exactly useEffect is doing. Let's understand it. So by using this hook, this useEffect hook, you're telling React to do something after the component is rendered. So initially, if you remember, we have written this outside. Now I have moved it into useEffect hook. So there is a life cycle which is happening in React component. So initially what happens, this component, this counter component renders this DOM, this button element. So when React is going to start reading this code, so it start reading this code from here till here. So it sees something like this, use state. Okay. So React will remember, okay, I need to create this count as a state variable and keep it somewhere. So whenever this value is going to change, I need to update the DOM. That's how the standard React is following behind the scene. Then React saw useEffect. Okay, so React has seen useEffect. So whatever function you have passed in the useEffect hook, React is going to keep that function. And once the DOM is rendered, once this button, in this case we have a button only, once this button has been rendered into the DOM, React has remembered that I need to call the function which I have passed in the useEffect hook. So React is going to call this function after the DOM render. Because obviously I have a dependency of this title, right? Maybe after the DOM render, something like that. So useEffect, so you just need to remember this function will be called after the render and after every render. Getting my point? So initially, if I refresh this application, right, I got 0 value, right? So this document.title, this line has been executed after the button has rendered with a 0 count. But when I click on it, my state is changing, right? That's why this button is getting rendered once again. That's why this document.title is also getting updated. So after every render, you just need to remember this useEffect function is going to get called after every render. That's it. Now it's a good practice. You should use this useEffect hook inside your component. I mean, you must be thinking of calling this function here outside the component, right? But the best practice is to call this function inside the functional component itself. There is a reason behind it, because you need to access the state, right? You need to access the props which are going to get passed to this counter component or any other component. So the good practice I would like to tell you about is write this useEffect hook inside your functional component. This is one of the important points I would like to mention. Okay, so now let's move on and see the other example, other side effect where I talked about, right? We'll see the fetch example where we are going to load some data from the server side. And for that, I'm going to use a open source API basically, because we don't have time to create all the server side code, maybe to write it in Java or to write it in Node. So I'm going to use this REST API. I'll show you that API. So this is an open source REST API for loading all the countries. So I'm going to use this REST. So it's similar to like, you're writing your own Node.js code or any of the server side code. So you're going to expose this API. So we are going to see how we can connect to the API and how we can load data from the server side using useEffect hook. So this loading of data is also side effect when we talk in terms of React. So let's create this example. So I'm going to use this API. So for that, I'm going to create one more component called function country list. So this is my component. I'm going to create different state variable here. So first will be country list, or I would say countries only. and let's call set countries. Going to use useState, and initially we'll pass the empty array. I'm going to create one more state variable, and this will be loading. So when the data is loading, I'm going to set this state value. So set loading use state, and initially the loading value will be true. So the data is loading, or I can say false as initial value. I'm going to create one more state variable called error. So if we get any error while loading the data, we're going to set this state value. Set error will be the function, and let's have initial value of blank, the empty value. So I got 3 different state variables here, one for storing the countries, one for setting the state, uploading state, and one for the error. Now let's return the DOM. So I'm going to use UL and LI here. So I'm going to have a different country name here. Say suppose I'll start with India. Here's but the default value, and let me render this country list inside my app. So I'm going to remove this counter. Instead of this, I'm going to use country list just to see if my component is rendering. Save, and I see the country as India. Cool. So let's move on. Now I'm going to use the REST API to load the data. So I'm going to use useEffect hook, and so this loading of data is a side effect, and I'm going to handle that side effect inside useEffect hook. So I'm going to use fetch here. So this is built-in function of JavaScript, fetch, which we can use to load the data from any specific URL. So I'm going to use this URL. So I think I need to copy that URL once again. So let me copy that and paste it here. Okay, so I'm going to use this URL, and it's a good idea to save this into a variable. So let's take it out from here, and maybe I'm going to create a new variable, URL, and let's use this URL here. So I'm using fetch to fetch data from this URL. So once the data is available, I'm going to use .then function. This is a promise, and I'm going to get the results, which I'm going to convert using result.json function. So this is going to get converted into JSON object, and once it got converted, then I'm going to set this country values using my set countries function. And obviously this is state, because once the data is loaded, once the country data is loaded, I need to render the DOM, or I need to render this country data into the DOM. So I'm going to use one more then function, which is going to get back the result, and here I'm going to call set countries, and set countries I'm going to pass result. We'll write one more catch function which will catch the errors. So something like this, and if we have any error, I'm going to set the error value. So set error will be like true. Okay, so I'm fetching from the URL, and while fetching, so let's use some of the state variables. So when this hook is going to get called, this function, I'm going to set the set loading value to true. So this will indicate that data start loading. Then I'm calling this fetch with the URL. So result, probably I can use data here just to indicate that this is a data. And so I'm going to wrap this into curly brackets, because once data is available, I need to set different state values. So I'm going to format it a bit. Okay, so once data is available, I'm setting the set countries. I'm using the set countries function to set our country's state value, but at the same time we need to set the loader also. So set loading will be false because we have already loaded the data here. And in case of catch also, in case of error also, I'm going to wrap this into curly brackets, and then as I'm setting the error, I need to set the value of loading here. So here also set loading will be false, because if the data is loaded successfully, I need to set the loader to false, or even in case of error, we need to set error to true, something like this. Okay, so I think this looks good. So I'm fetching the data using the URL, then data. Let's see what happens here. So I'm going to console.log and let's see what data we are getting. So I'm going to log data, going to inspect, and let's see what data we are getting here. So I'm going to save. Cool. So I think the data is loading. I can see a lot of data, like 250 different countries are loading here. Let's see what data we get. So we have a name. What are the different attributes we have? We have name, we have currencies. So I'm going to use name attribute only. So if you see here, it's keep getting rendered, right? You should see the scroll bar, right? It's keep logging, and even now my Mac is going to hang. So we did one mistake. So let me stop this program for some time and I'm going to get back to you, because we went into the infinite loop and I wanted to show it to you what's going to happen if you don't write your fetch or you don't write your useEffect hook. In case of fetch, this is what going to happen. So I need to close my browser now because it is not going to stop. Okay, so I have corrected my useEffect hook, and you don't see like that log is coming here. So what was happening basically, this useEffect hook is going to get called after every render, right? So what was happening initially, this ULLI is going to get rendered, and then this hook function is going to get called, right? So every time it's fetching the data. Okay, and it's setting the state value. So what is going to happen once the state is updated, the DOM is going to render once again. So after every render, this hook is going to get executed. Because of that, it keeps on loading the data. It keeps on fetching more data, and it's going to set this value. So how to stop that? How to have one time render only? So I need to load this data once, right? I don't want to load this data because this is not something which I'm polling, right? I'm not going for a polling of data. I need to load this data only once, and to handle that, we have something called second argument to our useEffect hook. That is called this array. So you just need to pass a simple blank empty array to this useEffect hook as a second argument to this function, and this is going to get called only once, only first render. So once this ULLI India is going to get rendered, it's going to call this function, and after every state update, it's not going to call it. So this is how we handle only one-time render using the useEffect hook. So now if I save my program or refresh my program, you see that I got the data only once. So I'm going to use this name value to render the list of countries here. Before that, I'm going to handle some of the conditional rendering. So I'm going to check, like, say suppose when the data is loading. So if data is loading, I'm going to show the loader, right? So I'm just going to return a simple div here with saying like loading ... something like this. Okay, so when the data is loading, I want to show this DOM, and I'm going to check one more condition here. In case of error also, like I will not be able to render the data, right? So in case of error, we are going to return maybe another div with, will say something went wrong. I'm just writing something here, but you can write proper error component with different colors and all, like red color, something like that. Something went wrong in case of error. So what is the value of error? So error initial value is empty. Okay. So maybe we can make it Boolean value also if we want. So I'm going to save this. Still the output is India because I don't have, like, if you see, you know, initially when the data is loading, you're going to see that loading message, right? It's coming for a fraction of second. As the data is loading very fast, we are not able to see it. We are not able to see it. Okay. So let's, now once we have the countries, once we have the data, we have to render it, right? So let's render that country data. So I'm going to use a standard map function. So I'm going to loop through countries dot map, and I'm going to get country, or I would say item, something like this, and I'm going to render the li elements. So let's go next line. I'll return the li, and what should be the key? So let me see if I'm getting any ID value here for the country. So I have currencies, alpha2 code flag. Do I have anything related to ID? I don't think so. Probably I'm going to use index for the key. So I'm going to use that I value, and let me put key as I mean, we shouldn't use I can use this alpha2 code also. Probably this will be different for each element. So let me try this only. So item dot this alpha2 code, and here I'm going to use item dot name of the country. So now I'm going to save my program. See that we got the list of countries rendered, and I don't think so. I don't see any error here. So I think that alpha2 code works. Cool. So this is how we can load data. So this is a really simple example. So you can use useEffect because this loading of data is a side effect. And that's why I have put that loading part, that fetch part, into the useEffect hook. And this array is really important because we want to load this data once, right? I have written some conditional code, if you see here, right? And I'm returning the list of countries by using the map function. So this is the example of the fetch side effect, I can say. Let's move on and see some of the cleanup examples now. Okay, so for cleanup example, I'm going to use my counter once again. So I'm going to replace the app with counter. So let me see what I'm using. I'm using a country list. So I'm going to replace it with counter component. So this is our counter component, right? I'm going to save and refresh. We got the counter back. I'm going to create a new component here, function event button. So I'm going to add a new button component as a component inside the counter. So let me move this function from here to here, and this button is going to return, this event button is going to return a button component only. So I'm going to have a button with the name of event button, and I'm going to use useEffect hook inside this event button. So useEffect, and inside useEffect, this time I'm going to add an event listener. So this is basically, this doesn't depend on the state, so it is going to get called after every render. So let me add an event listener on the document only. Add event listener. I'm going to add an event listener for mouse move event, and I'm going to call the handler function. So let me write the handler function for that. I'm going to write handle move function. I'm just going to console.log move, or I can say mouse move. So let me call this function here. Handle move. So just a quick recap, I have created event button component, and I'm returning a simple event button, a button component with the label of event button. I'm using useEffect hook, and I'm adding an event listener on the document. So this is a document, right? So I'm adding an event listener on the document. So whenever I'm going to move my mouse over the document, it is going to call this handler function handle move, and this is going to print this mouse move value, this log. So now I'm going to use this component here inside counter. So let me move my button below, and I'm going to add some conditional code here. So I'm going to check if count is less than 5. So initially count will be 0, right? This count is a state here inside this counter component. So I'm checking whether count is less than 5. If count is less than 5, I'm going to render the event button. Otherwise, I'm not going to render the event button. So you see here, right? So I have this, and I think I need to wrap it inside div. So let me wrap this inside div. So we got button and event button. So I'm going to show event button only when count is less than 5. So when this event button is going to get added during the first render or after every render, basically I'm listening for document.add event listener mouse move event. So I'm going to save this. Now you see the event button, because the count is 0. So whenever I'm moving my mouse here, see that whenever I'm moving my mouse on the document, I'm getting that mouse move logged into the console, right? Now I'm going to increment the counter, and you will see the behavior, right? So let me increment the counter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now the button is not there. And if you look at below, the count of mouse move is 1064. Now I'm going to start moving my mouse and see the difference. See that? This is a problem. The mouse move is still getting called. But isn't it a part of event button, right? I have added that event handler inside event button, but still it is getting called. See that? This is an issue. So whenever you're going to use any event handlers, if you remember in JavaScript, it's really important you should clean those event handlers, because now event button is not part of my DOM, but its events are still triggering because I didn't write any cleanup code for the events. That's why useEffect provides us a function. We call it a cleanup function, which we can return from the useEffect function. I mean, useEffect, this handler function I can say, or as an argument we have passed here. So I can return a cleanup function here. So I'm going to return a cleanup function where I'm going to clean up this mouse move event. So I'm going to copy this and paste it here, and I just need to write remove event listener mouse move. Now I'm going to save my program, and now if I come back, see that mouse move is working fine. Now if I click 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, now the button is not there, but if I move my mouse, see that I'm not getting that mouse move locked. It's still the same number. So this is how we can use useEffect to clean up the events or any other subscriptions you have added in your useEffect function or hook. Couple of more points I would like to mention about useEffects. I mean, you can use this useEffect hook any number of times inside your component. So if you see here, right, in the counter component, I have used useEffect, but I can add one more useEffect call here. So maybe say, suppose I want to take this, I'm going to remove this event button for now. I don't need it. And say, suppose I want to add one more useEffect here for the document.add event listener. So I can copy this useEffect and I can paste it here. So I can have multiple useEffects. Okay, handle move is not defined. So let me copy this one from here and I'm going to paste it here inside the counter. So I can have multiple useEffect, and these useEffect are going to get called in the sequence. So first this useEffect is going to get called, which will print the title here on the top, and this useEffect is going to get called after this one. So now if I go here and if I mouse move, see that the mouse move event is working fine. Even I can increment and this is also working fine. So I can have multiple useEffects hook, and maybe I can have a separation of concern. Like here I'm doing the DOM manipulation and here I'm doing the event handling part. So I can use different useEffect for different purposes. One last point I would like to mention about this argument which we pass here to this component, right? So I don't need to add event listeners whenever I'm changing the state, right? This event is getting added all the time whenever I'm incrementing the count. So say suppose I want to get rid of it, I can have this array as a default argument, right? So this useEffect is going to get called once after the first render is going to happen. So now say suppose I want to call this useEffect maybe based on so I'm going to console.log here. Let's first understand how this works. So I will write something like events here because I'm adding events. So let's save. If you see here, this events got called, right? And the mouse move is working, but when I change the state, when I increment the counter, see that the events are not getting called. I mean, this useEffect is not getting triggered. If I remove this array and now if I save and come back, you see that events, now if I change my state, see still calling the useEffect hook for this one because the state is changing. But I don't want to add listeners, when the state is changing. So I can add this default argument, the empty array. And now if I save, you can see, right, it got called first time. Now I'm changing the state, but the events is not getting logged. But say suppose I want to have some side effects based on the state value. I can pass that state value here. So whenever the count is going to change, so initially this useEffect is going to get triggered on the first render. But maybe based on some condition or based on some state value, I want to trigger it again. I can do that by passing that state value here. So I'm using my count, which is my state value in the counter, and I'm passing that as an argument to this array. And now if I save, see that events, I'm going to clean it up. Now whenever I'm going to click, that event is going to get called. So you can have multiple values here, like so now I'm having count, maybe you can use new count, something like that. And you can pass all those state values or maybe props, and based on those state values and props, this useEffect is going to get triggered. So this is one of the important point I would like to mention. And I think this video is going to be longer because I have covered a lot of topics about useEffect. So I think we have covered a lot, and I'm going to stop here. I hope you like this video. So if you like this video, please subscribe to this channel because I'm going to post more React related videos and other technology videos on this channel. So do subscribe and share with your friends and family or technology people. Thanks for watching. I'm going to see you in the next video.